Hi!
Good morning.
How are you doing today?
Great.
Good! I just have 3 questions for you.
Okay, I'm
so
ready.
I'm just curious, what are your thoughts when you hear the word saturated fat?
Saturated fat, I think, good.
Awesome! So you're do you believe that it's healthy or unhealthy or in between?
I think too much of anything is a bad thing. So I think it's a good thing sometimes.
Perfect. I like to hear that. And then, do you know of any sources of saturated fat?
Saturated fat, I think, comes from plants.
There definitely are some plant sources. Like coconut oil, raw cacao, which is just, dark chocolate. But a lot of it comes from like animal fats, dairy products, and whole milk and cheeses. So it definitely does come from plants though too.
Okay.
So you were right on that.
You learn something new every day.
Right. Well, those were the 3 questions that I wanted to ask you, and so thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, how are you doing today?
Fantastic. How are you?
I am doing great, thanks. I just have a couple questions. Are you up for answering them?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So, you want to come a little closer to me?
Sure.
I promise I don't bite.
Okay.
What do you think of when you hear the words saturated fat?
Sounds like something I'd see on the back of like a candy wrapper or something.
That is true. It is on the nutrition labels, and it is important to look at it and know the sources that it's coming from. Okay. Saturated fats are better from the whole source, so think of the omega grass-fed beef, those great beef products, beef tallow, lard. They're going to have some saturated fat, but they also have so many other quantities that make it good for the body.
Okay.
So, do you think that saturated fat is unhealthy, healthy, in between?
I feel like it's probably healthy in small quantities.
So moderation, kind of?
Moderation, sure.
Perfect. And yeah, exactly. It all depends on the person too, because we all metabolize things differently.
Okay.
So saturated fat is not necessarily bad or good. It has its purpose.
Sure.
And finally, what products, I guess I kind of gave this away, but what products do you think of when you think of saturated fats?
Well, beef, I guess. Otherwise, probably like my mind would go to like candy and things like that. Things you would normally think of as fatty or sugary.
Yeah. Yep. And so those definitely are some sources. Those are the ones that we want to stay clear of just because of the other additives in there. But getting it from whole products, even coconut oil, avocado, salmon, a lot of these whole products are going to have a mixture of fatty acids. So that includes saturated fats and unsaturated fats. So you get a variety. So don't just avoid them.
Good to know. Good to know.
Those are all the questions that I have.
Alrighty. Well, thank you very much.
No, thank you. How are you doing today?
Great. How about you?
I am doing well. It is beautiful outside. So I have a couple questions to ask you.
Okay.
All right. So when you hear the word saturated fat, what do you think?
Lots of times I think it's probably not good.
That is a very, very common misconception. A lot of times it is been lumped in with trans fats, and those are actually not great. And the saturated fat isn't good when it comes to the types of foods. So when you see it in a lot of the processed foods, that's the type of saturated fat we don't want. Mainly because there's other additives in those foods, and that can lead to increased risk of disease. So, now that you know that, what do you think about saturated fat? Do you think it's unhealthy, healthy, or somewhere in between?
I'd say somewhere in between.
Perfect! That is great! Yes! So, saturated fat is somewhere in between. It is very individualized. Depends on how people metabolize it. But moderation is key. You want to have a variety of fats, except trans fats. We want to avoid those ones. So getting in a variety and moderation. So what types of foods do you think saturated fats are in?
Oh, I'd say a lot of fried foods.
Yes, yeah. Those again are the types that we don't want to eat, but it's in whole foods. So think of whole milk, whole cheeses, yogurt, so dairy products. Think of animal products, beef, lard, tallow. But they also bring in a bunch of other different qualities, and most foods have combinations of fatty acids. So you're going to get a variety, and that's what we want. You can also find it in some plant foods like coconut, raw cacao, which is dark chocolate. So those are a couple other sources as well.
Okay.
So when it comes to saturated fats, it might raise LDL cholesterol, but it raises a different kind. It is actually the puffy kind. And those aren't associated with increased risk of heart disease or anything. It can actually be beneficial for the health. We need saturated fat. So I hope that, that helps with a little bit of misconception with it. And thank you for answering these questions.
Thank you for telling me.
Yes, my pleasure. Hey, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Awesome. So I have a couple questions for you, if you don't mind.
No, don't mind.
All right, so when you hear the word saturated fat, what comes to your mind?
Well, I've learned that it's not as bad as we have thought in the past, but I don't know a whole lot about it. So.
Yeah, it definitely is, one of those fats that's been lumped with trans fat.
Right.
There's been a lot of misconception with it.
Right.
Mainly because, again, it's been lumped with trans fats when it comes to research.
Right.
It's in fried foods, and we know that a lot of those baked goods and processed foods are not great for us to begin with.
Right.
But saturated fat is needed for the body. So it's part of our brain, cell membranes, mitochondria. It helps with energy. So the body needs it. So it's definitely a necessary nutrient. And so now that I kind of gave a little bit away,
Yeah.
do you think it is unhealthy, healthy, or in between?
Probably in between, depends on where you get it from.
Yes, exactly. So it depends on the source. So we want to go more with those whole food sources versus those processed middle aisle type foods.
Right. Yes.
And so what kind of foods do you think saturated fats are in?
I don't know.
And that's
really know.
okay. Yeah, so they're kind of mixed into a lot of different foods. So again, those middle aisle processed foods, baked goods, processed meats, but you find it in whole products too. So beef, tallow, lard, you'll find it in coconut, you'll find it in dairy products, so whole milk, whole fat cheeses, whole fat yogurts, and then a lot of different animal meats too. So like you mentioned, it all depends on the source and how that will affect your body. So
would it be good to eat those foods in moderation?
definitely. So those foods, again, they're also going to have other fatty acids in them. So you're going to get a variety of really good fats for the body, but also like the lard and the tallow, the coconut and coconut oil. They are going to be great for high heat cooking, and we don't want olive oil can withstand a certain amount of a temperature up to medium heat. Otherwise, toxins start to form, and then we have toxins that we're introducing into our body. So saturated fat foods are going to be great for those high heat cooking processes and really be beneficial.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Hey, how are you doing today?
Doing well, and yourself?
Doing great. I'm enjoying this weather and
Yes.
excited for summer. Is it okay if I ask you a couple questions?
Sure.
Perfect. So when it comes to saturated fat, what comes to your mind? What do you think of when you hear those words?
There can be bad saturated fat, but also good saturated fat. So like coconut oil, pork lard.
You know your stuff. So then would you say that saturated fat is unhealthy, healthy, or somewhere in between?
Well, I guess based on what I said with the coconut oil and pork lard, I guess I would say healthy.
So, our body does need it, and getting it from those sources are also going to provide us with other saturated fatty acids and other vitamins and minerals that we need. So, a lot of good stuff. And so, I know you already mentioned it, but can you think of any other sources of saturated fats?
I guess eggs would be. What else? Maybe beef in there. Yeah.
Yep. And dairy products.
Oh yeah, dairy. Yep.
and unfortunately those processed foods too, but we won't really mention them because we want to stay away from them. So so those were the questions that I had you, and you know your stuff, so thank you. That was awesome.
Yeah, great. Thank you.